I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I am not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. What we have here is a failure to communicate. This is Bill Wilder with the Life Cycle Institute at Life Cycle Engineering, and I thank you for joining me today as we talk about ways that we can avoid that proverbial failure to communicate. One of the reasons sometimes that we have difficulty reaching people or communicating in the process of managing a change is the sheer volume of opportunities that people have today to be communicated with. But let's talk about communication. When we say communication, are we communicating in, for example, this slide, or are we communicating when people actually understand, hear, and act on what we're communicating? And I'm going to suggest that the things we're going to share with you today are designed to help you be effective in your communication. Let's take a look at this whole issue of communication. It's an exciting time. There are so many different ways that people can be communicated with today. Probably more so than any time in our history. But what that does, it means that we've got to communicate often. Let's look at these numbers. These numbers come from John Kotter's book, Leading Change, that was published 15 years ago. And at that time, he indicated that the research would suggest that in the course of a 3-month period, that a typical individual or employee is likely to be communicated with via 2,300,000 words or numbers. And if we communicated the change that we are working on in one 30-minute presentation, one 60-minute meeting, one 600-word article, and one 2,000-word memo, in that same period of time, we would be sharing 13,400 words, or 1/2 of 1% of the total communication market during that period. What is the probability that 1/2 of 1% of what I have heard or been communicated to is really going to change my behavior? So the first issue we have is this massive amount of communication that's going on around us, and the need to be very focused and to communicate often. We cannot over-communicate. A second issue that drives this is how we communicate. So I'm going to ask you to take a look at a poll and ask you to think about a change that you've been through recently and do a self-assessment on how you managed the communication process of that change. So let's take about a minute here and go through these 5 questions, and let's see how we all stack up in the way we communicated in a recent change that we were involved in. Okay, let's see some results. Okay, it's doing a little calculating now. Right. So take a look at these numbers. Typically, we would say that excellent would be, in the 4 category that you averaged around 4. Good would be around 3. So we're not poor, but it certainly illustrates that there's some room for improvement. And these six particular characteristics of communication related to change are six that we have found in our work make a huge difference in the effectiveness of the communication plan. Was I visible? Was I out there actively engaged? Did involved in the change? Did I link the performance of the organization, the goals of the organization to the change? Was I able to provide for feedback? Is question 3. We're going to talk a little bit about that some more too, because that's becoming more and more important. Face-to-face, how important that is, we're going to talk about that. And then communicating frequently and effectively with the managers. So as we see in this latter one, we did a little better. But the whole objective in a change is to help our organization move through a continuum of resistance, as you see in this commitment curve in the bottom left, where we start out as resistant, through awareness or knowing why a change is necessary, to understanding so that not only do we know why it's necessary, but what is changing and how it's affecting me personally, to where I've actually now accepted it and made a commitment to it, which means that I'm going to actually execute on the change. And then lastly, that I'm an advocate, that we would move through this continuum and get out of the initial resistance where we don't want to hear about it, we don't want to see it, and we don't want to talk about it, we don't want to have anything to do with this change. And if we follow the tips that we're going to talk about now, I feel confident that you too will find that we can overcome this failure to communicate. 5 areas we would want you to focus your attention on. And these, again, come from the work that we've done and the embracing of the ProSci change management methodology and embracing some of the ideas of Kotter's. 5 areas we want to focus on. Who are we going to talk to? What is it we're going to say? When are we going to say it? How are we going to deliver it? And who's going to say it? So who we're talking to, what are we saying, when are we going to do it, how we do it, and who's going to say it. And this would be a good time for you to take some notes. So if you've got a notepad in front of you, I'd ask you to write down those 5 items: audience, messages, timing, delivery, and senders. And then underneath that, write audience. When we talk about audience, there are a lot of different ways to look at audience. And let's just jot down a few. First of all, function and level. So what functional part of the organization are you a member of, and what level within that function? These are 2 criteria that are going to impact how I communicate with you. Impact, how is it going to affect you personally? This is going to influence how I communicate with you. So first is function and level, second is impact. And then here at the end, these last 4 are just different constituents that you are likely to need to communicate with. And if you don't, they will. So if you're communicating with your employees, but you're not being proactive about communicating with your customers, suppliers, and community, I can promise you your employees are. So it's important to think about all of the constituents that will be influenced and impacted by this change, and who will influence and impact how the employee reacts to this change. So we're going to focus on 3 types of employees. And really, we're going to narrow in now on the levels. First of all, the employee themselves. So now we're still taking our notes. We've got the 5 categories: the audience, and then under audience, some examples. And now under the employees, we've got 3 categories, and that is one we're calling employees, the people on the floor, the people that are making things happen. What is it we want to talk to them about? We want to talk to them about how it's going to personally affect them. So in the process of communicating a change, until you get that out there, they're not going to hear anything else. They're not going to hear anything else about what the change is or how it's going to take place or how it ties to organizational goals. What they really want to hear right up front is, how is it going to affect me? And be very clear about what you do and don't know, when more information is going to be available, and then how they can give you feedback. Is it email? Is it a suggestion box? Do they, what is the best way for them to let you know their reaction and their recommendations regarding this change? The next audience we'll talk about are the managers. And here it's important that they clearly understand the key message that you will be communicating to the employee, that they're staying one step ahead, that they're not being surprised, that the employees know things about the change that before they do. I'm all about the skip level thing, but in this case, this is not the right place to be doing the skip level. They need to clearly understand the scope and how it relates to them specifically and what you expect of them. And then lastly, it's the senior leadership. And here we need to focus in really on just the summary level of the important things that you need them to do, the key decision points, and then how this change is going to advance the overall organization objectives. And they probably more so than any of the three groups really need to clearly understand how it affects the financials and the other measures, the other metrics for how the organization is measured. So that's audience. Okay. Next is the message itself. I'm going to read this to you. Our goal is to reduce our mean time to repair parameters so that they are perpetually lower than all major competitors inside the United States and out. In a similar vein, we have targeted new product development cycle times, order process times, and other customer-relevant processes for change. How about this as an alternative? We're going to satisfy customer needs faster than anybody in our industry. The point is, keep it simple. One of the competencies or characteristics of a strong leader is this ability to keep people focused and help them fight through the noise to understand it and simplify so that you can consistently deliver this message. So you want to focus in on the objectives. Ideally, you can tell some stories or use metaphors and analogies that make it relevant to the people that you're speaking with, and going right back to that audience that we started with at the beginning. Customized to the audience. Anyone who's out doing teaching, anyone who's out doing keynote speeches or anything else will tell you that one of the fundamental competencies of a good teacher and a good speaker is an awareness of your audience and some fundamental research on who that audience is that you're speaking to. Okay? So that's the message. So we got audience, we got message. Now we got timing. And in the case of timing, the closer to the event or the behavior change, the better. And then if it isn't in immediate proximity, then there needs to be a plan in place for reinforcing that message down the road. We know, for example, as trainers, as people that are in the learning profession, that when someone goes through a learning experience with the Lifecycle Institute, that it is very important that individual be able to apply that new knowledge or skill immediately and experience success. So when we do a class, for example, we work hard to have the participant identify 2 or 3 very specific goals that they can achieve in 90 days. So when you're thinking about the timing, think about what is a behavior that you're going to be asking this person, because it's all about the individual, this person, to engage in as soon as close to that event as possible, hopefully within 90 days. And clearly ahead of the deployment schedule. You certainly want to be out there before all of a sudden they come into the office one day and they crank up the computer and they've got a new expense reporting system and nobody knows how to run it. And then lastly, repeat. 70% of the audience needs to be reached at least 3 to 6 times with that same simple message, so that it's reinforced. And then again, looking at the way we approach learning, one of the things we know is that if I tell you something once within 30 days, I'll be lucky if you remember 10% of it. But if over that 30-day period, I expose you to this very same thought 6 times at intervals now across that time, I can get retention up to as high as 90%. So it's very important to reach 70% of your target audience at least 3 to 6 times. So that is timing. Now let's talk about delivery. So the next list on your notepad there is delivery. Look at this fella. Let's do another poll here. Let's say what is this manager conveying here in this image? And you can just type your answer straight into the box there that you see in front of you. $15 seconds. Okay, let's see some responses here. Can everybody see it? Okay, I'm looking at this. I'm looking at you messed up, anger and frustration, totally mad, anger, aggression, telling me what to do or else, an angry message. Yeah, all of that. Except what this guy's actually doing is celebrating the fact that they just won the trophy. And he's telling his team, you guys are the best. Point is, we communicate in a lot of ways. And the fact is that when we communicate, words actually represent 10% of what we're communicating. The sounds, 30%. And the physical, 60%. This is why in poll after poll, and ProSci, the organization who's the leading global researcher of change management methodologies, has consistently in their research discovered that the most effective form of communication is face-to-face. And it is vital. And the extent to which you can do face-to-face, whether at the group level or at the individual level, it will drive, especially in the early stages, it will drive a lot of the effectiveness of the change. And if you think about it, let me give you an example. Bill gave Jim the book. So I'm saying that Bill gave Jim the book, right? Bill gave Jim the book. So now the focus is that I gave the book to Jim. Bill gave Jim the book. Now the focus is on Jim. And as you can see, I'm using the exact same words, but in this case, strictly based on my sounds, the 30%, what I'm emphasizing influences what I mean. So, again, face-to-face, very important, especially in the early stages. A couple of others, group meetings and presentations, one-on-one coaching and discussion, and non-personal electronic and written feedback were the three that in the ProSci research again and again come up as the best ways to communicate. And you see here the phrase different forms highlighted. In today's environment where there's so many different ways to communicate, the most effective change programs or initiatives involve multiple uses of media for communicating. And whether it be social media or emails or online surveys and polls, there's a whole host of electronic tools and physical, non-personal type tools, written feedback, etc., that you can use to help drive this two-way dialogue in the delivery of the communications message. So that's the delivery. The last of the five is sender. And in the case of the sender, the research has shown that there really are two primary senders in this whole communication process in change. There is the immediate supervisor, who individuals want to hear how the change is going to affect them personally. So I expect my immediate boss, who knows me well, who I know well, who I have a personal relationship with, to be able to articulate to me how this change is going to affect me, my relationship with her, my relationship with my peers. And that immediate supervisor has that credibility about what my day-to-day work life is like, and therefore it can reach me on the issue of what's in it for me. Now, when it comes to the overarching organizational goals, perhaps the financials of the organization or our competitive position in the marketplace, or what can happen to the organization if we don't undergo this change, I am much more receptive to hearing that message from the highest level person that can deliver it. And ideally, it's the person in charge, and it's the sponsor, and they're very visible, and they're very persuasive and compelling in their ability to draw a direct line of sight for me from the change that's undergoing and the expectations of behavior change and how that ties to the organizational goal, our financial performance, and our position in the marketplace. So there you go. You got your audience, you got the message, you got the timing, you got the delivery, and you've got the sender. If you focus on those five areas, then you'll be much more compelling and effective with your communication. Now, the way you use those depends a lot on the scale and scope and time frame of the change. And here's an example of how you might assess that. If you've got, as you can see in the top left box, a small change, but a resistant organization, here are some examples of who the senders and how often and the different delivery mechanisms that you might use to convey your message. And as you can see coming across, depending on the lower right, a large radical change with an organization is ready. Highest level executive, very frequent, carefully crafted. As you can see, all of them face-to-face is always preferred, especially early on. And when it's a large change, obviously the highest level executive in the organization needs to be a part of that. Now, how do you put all that together? Here's an example of how you might approach it. Looking across the timeline of the milestones in the change initiative, looking across the 5 dimensions that we talked about, your audience, your message, delivery, sender, date, and time, is just go through here and think about, okay, at the very beginnings of the rumbling, the rumor mill that a change might be going on, who do you need to be talking to? What do you need to be saying to them? This is just a simple framework for you to put together a communication plan. And if you're undergoing a change, we believe and have found that it is really essential that early on you begin to start thinking about what these elements are in each of these dimensions. And you may not have them all completed in this first phase, but at least begin to start thinking through how often you're communicating. You're constantly tweaking it. You've set up this two-way communication back and forth through the various two-way vehicles. And if you do all that, then we feel like that odds are very good that you'll be celebrating a successful change in your organization based on the strength of your communication. Hopefully these tips were helpful for you. You could go online and take a look at some of the additional resources we have on our website, which is lce.com. You might also want to look at the ProSci site, and that's PROSCI. It's an organization that we're aligned with on change management. You might also want to consider some upcoming events where we will be applying different elements of these communication techniques and tips that we've talked about. The train-the-trainer class that's going to be in Charleston in April, and then a couple of online classes that don't require you to come to Charleston, although I can't imagine why you wouldn't want to in April. It's an ideal time. But at any rate, if you can't get here, there's a couple of opportunities to participate in online classes in the latter part of April, one on organizational change and making your message count. I very much appreciate your participation today. We are eager to hear your comments and feedback and suggestions and any requests for additional information, so please let us know that. Here's how you can reach me and find the website. And thank you again for participating. in our webinar this afternoon. Goodbye.